Okay, so let's unpack this. If I look at the calendar and see February 13th, my brain, honestly, it just goes into autopilot.
Hmm.
It's the day before Valentine's Day. You're either frantically trying to get a dinner reservation or celebrating Valentine's Day.
Right.
Feels like a placeholder day.
It's just a bridge to get to the 14th.
Exactly. But then I started reading through this stack of sources we have for today,
Mm.
and wow, that assumption is just dead wrong.
It is completely wrong. It's actually fascinating how much weight this single date carries. If you pull the thread of February 13th, you don't find chocolates or roses.
Not at all.
You find a global map of power. We're talking about a date that serves as this really strange magnetic node for history.
It's almost eerie. I mean, we've got sources here ranging from a ballroom in 1920s Harlem to the Sahara Desert, all the way to the British Parliament.
Yeah, and one of the sources calls it a global tapestry, which I think is a really useful framework for us today. But we should be clear, it's not a pretty tapestry.
Right.
It's stitched together with stories of Black self-determination, terrifying atomic yields, and eventually the state finally admitting it was wrong.
It really centers on the body, doesn't it? Whose bodies are allowed to move freely and whose are subjected to radiation or government policy.
That is the mission for this deep dive. We're going to connect these dots, Harlem, Ghana, Algeria, Australia, to understand how February 13th became this day of reckoning.
Okay, so grab your coffee or your tea. Let's get into it. We're traveling all over the map today, and we're starting a full century ago, February 13th, 1923, Harlem, New York.
And right in the middle of that cultural explosion, the Harlem Renaissance, you have the founding of the New York Renaissance.
Better known as the Rens.
The Rens.
Now, for sports fans listening, the Rens are legendary. But the sources really emphasize this wasn't just, a group of guys playing pickup.
No, not at all. This was the first Black-owned, all-Black professional basketball team.
And that Black-owned part is the key, isn't it?
It is the critical insight here. You have to understand the economy of sports in the Jim Crow era. There were Black players, sure, but they were usually playing for white owners. They were employees.
And probably not well-paid ones.
Right. The founder, Robert Bob Douglas, wasn't interested in that. He wanted equity.
He wanted an institution.
Exactly. He made a deal with the Renaissance Ballroom in Harlem to use their dance floor as a home court. And that location is so important.
It paints such a picture. The Rennie was the social hub of Harlem. You've got jazz, you've got this intellectual movement happening, and then smack in the middle of it, you have this basketball powerhouse playing on the dance floor.
It actually changed the game itself. Because it was a dance floor, the ball didn't bounce right, it was dead.
So you couldn't dribble much.
You'd lose control. So it forced the Rens to focus on rapid passing, on speed, on team chemistry. They developed this fluid, fast-paced style that was just totally different.
And they didn't just look good, they won. I mean, the stats here are absurd. From 1923 to the late 40s, they won something like 2,500 games.
And lost only about 500. An 83% win rate over 2 decades.
Against everybody, including the top white teams.
Yes. But here's why it matters for our tapestry idea. The Wrens were barnstormers. They traveled the country. They would go into towns where they couldn't eat at the restaurants or sleep in the hotels.
Because of segregation laws.
They'd sleep on the bus. And then, exhausted, they would step onto the court and absolutely dismantle the local white team.
It's a form of resistance. Excellence is resistance.
Precisely. Bob Douglas was proving Black enterprise could be dominant without needing validation from the white establishment. They built their own stage.
So that's the fight and build approach. You stay, you build, you dominate. But if we stay on February 13th and jump forward to 1970, we see the end of a very different story.
We do. We move to the death of Alfred Chief Sam in Ghana.
I have to admit, Chief Sam was a new name for me. His story starts around the same time as the Wrens, back in the 1910s.
He was a merchant from the Gold Coast, what's now Ghana, who came to the U.S. While Bob Douglas was thinking about building a team in Harlem, Chief Sam was in Oklahoma.
And he was basically saying the American experiment had failed.
He was a precursor to the Back to Africa movements that Marcus Garvey would later make famous. He went to these all-Black towns in Oklahoma that were facing increasing violence and new segregation laws, and he sold them a dream.
He was selling stock, right, to build a literal bridge back to Africa.
He bought a steamship called the SS Liberia. He promised them a new life on the Gold Coast where they could actually be free.
It sounds incredible, almost biblical. A return to the promised land.
Yeah.
But reading the details here, it didn't go smoothly.
That is a A massive understatement. It was a logistical nightmare. The ship was barely seaworthy. The British colonial authorities didn't want them coming in.
They saw them as agitators.
Exactly. They ran out of coal, ran out of food. When they finally arrived, the colonial government wouldn't let them settle where they'd planned.
So financially, the whole scheme just collapsed. Most of the people who went with him actually ended up coming back to the U.S.
They did, but here's why we include him. Chief Sam didn't come back. He died in his hometown in Ghana on February 13th, 1970. So despite the failure of the mass migration, he personally made it back. He stayed.
So it's the counterweight to the Rens then.
Yeah.
The Rens said, we will force America to respect us. And Chief Sam said, America will never respect us. We have to leave.
Exactly. One claims space in the ballroom. The other seeks sanctuary across the ocean. Two different frequencies of that desire for self-determination. And February 13th marks the birth of one and the death of the other.
It's amazing how the same date captures both mentalities. But,
Yeah.
okay, we need to shift gears. Because while they were trying to claim land for their people, we have another February 13th event where the land itself is the victim.
Yeah.
And this is where the timeline gets dark.
It does. We need to look at February 13th, 1960, the Sahara Desert.
Codename, Gerboise Bleue.
Bleue Gerboise, a small desert rodent. A cute name for, well, a weapon of mass destruction.
This was France's first atomic bomb test. And I think when people hear 1960s nuclear test, they don't usually think of Africa.
Which is the problem. France detonated this bomb in Algeria. And we need to be very clear about the context. Algeria was in the middle of a brutal war of independence against France.
So you have the colonizer detonating a nuke on the land of the people, trying to kick them out.
It is the ultimate assertion of dominance. It says, not only do we own this land, we can poison it. And the bomb itself, the scale, the yield was between 60 and 70 kilotons.
Help us visualize that. How big is that?
Well, the bomb dropped on Hiroshima was about 15 kilotons. So Gerboise Bleue was roughly 4 times as powerful.
4 times the size. In the middle of the desert.
And here's the thing about deserts. Colonial powers love to think of them as empty. The legal term is terra nullius, nobody's land.
But the Sahara isn't empty.
Not at all. There were Tuareg nomads, there were villagers in the oasis town of Regan.
And the sources mention that the French government claimed the fallout was contained. But that wasn't true, was it?
Not even close. Radioactive dust was detected as far away as Senegal and Ivory Coast. But the immediate tragedy was local. The populations near Regan were exposed to massive amounts of radiation. There are reports of birth defects, cancers, stuff that persists to this day.
It's such a violent contrast to the Rens. The Rens are about physical grace, and this is about the physical destruction of space through brute force.
It highlights the arrogance of a dying empire. France knew it was losing its grip on Algeria independence was just 2 years later, but they needed to prove they were still a superpower.
And they used African land as a laboratory.
It's a brutal node, as one source says. But if we follow that thread forward, we get to a moment where the state finally has to admit it was wrong, where the empire looks in the mirror.
Which takes us to February 13, 2008. Canberra, Australia.
A pivotal moment in the history of Indigenous rights.
This is the national apology to the stolen generations. Prime Minister Kevin Rudd standing in Parliament and finally saying the words sorry.
And for listeners who might not know the full history, we need to explain the stolen generations. This wasn't just a few incidents. From the early 1900s all the way to the 1970s, the Australian government had a systematic policy
of forcibly removing Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander children from their families.
Yes. And the goal was assimilation. The explicit intent was to breed out the indigenous culture.
It's just horrifying.
They put these children in white institutions, forbade them from speaking their languages, and often told them their parents were dead. It's recognized now as a form of cultural genocide.
And for decades, the government refused to apologize. I remember this. Previous prime ministers would express regret, but they wouldn't admit fault.
They were afraid of the liability.
Right.
Until February 13, 2008. Kevin Rudd didn't just apologize, he validated the truth. He said, "We apologize for the laws and policies that have inflicted profound grief, suffering, and loss."
It feels like the inverse of the French nuclear test. That was about silence and secrecy. The apology was about broadcasting the damage.
It's about naming the harm. You can't heal a wound you refuse to look at. In 1960, France refused to look. In 2008, Australia finally looked.
It connects back to that idea of bodies. The state feeling entitled to control bodies, whether it's moving them or stealing them.
And the apology is the moment the state admits, these bodies did not belong to us. We had no right. It's a surrender of that absolute power.
Speaking of surrendering power, or at least the empire realizing the game is up, we have to talk about Nelson Mandela.
You can't talk about liberation without him. And yes, February 13th is a key date in his timeline, too.
Okay, so set the scene for us. 1991, Mandela has been out of prison for about a year.
Just about exactly a year. He was released in February 1990. So on February 13th, 1991, he is in London addressing the British Parliament.
The optics of this are just wild. This is a man who was branded a terrorist by the British establishment for decades, and now he's being treated like a head of state.
It's a victory lap, but a strategic one. You have to remember, apartheid hadn't officially ended yet. The laws were crumbling, but the negotiations were incredibly fragile.
So he wasn't there just to shake hands, he was lobbying.
Exactly. He wanted the sanctions to stay in place. There was a huge push in the West to say, look, they let Mandela out, let's drop the sanctions and get back to business.
And Mandela used this speech to say no.
He told them the walk to freedom wasn't finished. He argued that until every South African had a vote, the pressure needed to stay on. He was using the platform of the former empire to squeeze the regime back home.
It links back to the Rens for me. The Rens had to play better than the white teams. Mandela had to be more strategic than the actual governments just to get them to do the right thing.
It's the burden of the oppressed. You have to be exceptional just to survive. But his presence there was proof the empire was finally reckoning with its legacy.
So we've seen the high-level politics apologies in Canberra, speeches in London. But power isn't just famous people in suits.
No, sometimes it's people on the street.
Which takes us to our final stop. The Central African Republic, February 13th, 2014.
A really tough situation. It was chaos. A civil war had been raging since 2012. You had the Seleka coalition and the anti-Balaka militias. The government had collapsed.
Humanitarian crisis.
Of the highest order. And in the middle of this violence, you have ordinary people in the capital, Bleue, taking action.
Right. Around February 13th, there were these massive protests. But they weren't protesting against the government, because there wasn't really one. They were protesting for security.
They were demanding that the militias be disarmed. They were using their bodies as shields, essentially. Marching to the airport, where the international peacekeepers were, demanding that they actually do their job.
It's the other side of the Mandela coin. Mandela is the elite diplomat working the halls of power. The people in Bangui are the civic resistance working the streets.
But the goal is the same. Safety, dignity, the right to wake up and not be afraid. Whether you're in Harlem in 1923 or Bangui in 2015, that is the universal thread.
It really does stitch together. When we step back and look at this global tapestry, we've got basketball, botched migrations, nuclear bombs, stolen children, and statesmen. It's a lot.
It is. But the synthesis is this. February 13th is a cross-section of the struggle for human dignity against state power. It shows us history isn't just one thing. It's all these struggles layering on top of each other.
And that liberation isn't a straight line. It takes different shapes.
Not at all. Sometimes liberation looks like scoring a basket. Sometimes it looks like surviving a nuclear test. Sometimes it's an apology from a prime minister. And sometimes, like with Chief Sam, it looks like dying while trying to find home.
It's interesting to trace the trajectory, though. We start in 1923 with the Rens fighting just to have a team. We end in 2008 with the government apologizing for theft. It feels like progress, but heavy progress.
It brings up a difficult question. We look at the Australian apology, and it was a beautiful, necessary moment. But then look back at the Sahara. The radiation from Gerboise Bleue has a half-life of thousands of years. No apology can scrub that from the soil. The genetic damage is done. You can't undo it.
That's the thought that sticks with me. You can apologize for stealing a child, and you should, but you can't give them their childhood back. You can apologize for the bomb, but you can't unpoison the desert.
Exactly. The tapestry of February 13th shows us that while we can achieve liberation and we could force the state to say sorry, some costs are permanent. The question is, knowing that the scars are permanent, what do we owe the survivors? An apology is the start, not the end.
That is a massive question to chew on. But that's why we do this. February 13th. Who knew?
History is always closer than you think.
Thanks for taking the dive with us. We'll see you on the next one.
Goodbye. Keep thinking.